Hello world and welcome to my first video. This is going to be part 1 in a series about creating an IK-driven procedural walk animation. I've created a little spider here because I think it looks really cool when all the legs are moving together. This was inspired by some other YouTube videos that I've seen and I will link them below. After watching the videos, I felt like I needed to understand the concepts and the parts involved in creating this a little bit better, and that is what we'll be exploring in this series. I'm going to set this up so that each video covers one group of concepts. If you feel that you're already familiar with this group of concepts, feel free to skip ahead. In this video today, we will be covering creating our character, importing it into Unity, and rigging it for basic animation. I am Mani, and I make games. Let's go! The aim of this video is not to teach you how to draw your own character, but as far as creating a character, there are some things that I would like to point out. For this specific character, I've chosen a size of 512 by 512 pixels at 100 pixels per inch. You can choose which image size and resolution you use, and it's good to play around with what works for the specific platform that you've chosen. The other thing that's very important to note here is that each element of this spider is on its own layer. That's very important when you import into Unity, because having each element on a different layer means that you can manipulate each element as a separate image. I've also named my layers in a way that makes sense, because when you start rigging, this will make your life considerably easier. When we export, we need to export into either a PSB or a PSD format for Unity to be able to import the file as a character rig. Exporting to a PSD format comes with a caveat, because Unity's PSD importer, ironically, only imports PSB files by default. But there is a script which I've linked below in the Unity documentation that you can implement to directly import PSD files as character rigs. What I usually do is I export to a PSD file from my software, which doesn't support PSB files, and then rename the PSD file to a PSB file in the operating system. This usually does the trick very nicely. Okay, now I've already exported my spider, and then when you get to Unity, all you do is you go assets, import new asset, you find your asset and you pull it in. In my case, I'm going to pull in Easy Spider 2. Import. It takes a minute. You'll see it appear here. Alternatively, you can just drag it from your File Explorer into this window. Now, if we look at our properties right here, you'll see it has mosaic ticked as well as character rig. If this is fine, you can see all the different layers are on different parts. It's very important when you create your file not to have anything extra like a background layer or anything like that. It just makes your life easier if you can leave that out. Now let's go into our sprite editor. Here you'll see all the parts of our sprite laid out. Now we'll go to skinning editor. And there's our spider, all set out for us. In the video description, you'll find links to the documentation for 2D animation in Unity. First off, to get our spider rigged, let's click on visibility. We have no bones at the moment, but we do have all our sprites correctly named. First thing we'll need to do is to create a root bone. The root bone basically is the first bone that's created, and all the other bones are attached to that. So if the root bone changes position or rotates, all the other bones follow. I'm going to create a root bone that lies down horizontally. The reason I do this will become clear later on when we do the script to start moving our spider from left to right. What I can say right now is that basically if we put the bone upright, then all the movement angles for this specific bone are rotated by 90 degrees, which makes it harder to figure out the logic for the movement. Now, let's rig everything else. Before we make a mistake, I am going to set the visibility of the head. Take that away so that I can see the start of each leg. You take the first leg, put the bone down at the beginning, and put another pivot at the joint and add a new bone. Then right click to detach. If it's not linked to the root bone, just click there. Otherwise, click here. There you go. Rinse and repeat until finished. I'm going to pause the video here and get back to you when I'm finished rigging up all the bones. Now that I've created all the necessary bones, it's good to do some housekeeping. On your bones, click here and expand. It's good to name your bones in a way that makes sense, because when you start rigging your character, it can be hard to find the appropriate bone for each element. This is especially true if your character has 8 legs. Now, let's rename our bone. This is going to be the root bone. You can also call it the head bone if you wish. We drill down. This bone 2 belongs to leg 1 over here. And it's the upper leg, so I'm going to call that leg U1. And that bone would be leg lower 1. How you name this is completely up to you, as long as it makes sense. Before I pause the video to start renaming the rest of my bones, I want you to take note that I also added bones to the 2 eyes and to the mouth parts. This is not strictly necessary, but I did that so that I can do silly things like wiggle the eyes and move the mouth if I wish to. Now I'm going to pause and finish all the renaming, and then I'll get back to you. Now that we've properly named all our bones, I want to give a quick mention to bone depth. Now, each sprite will be attached to its bone when it gets into Unity, and the bone depth will basically determine which bones or which parts of the sprite show in front of which parts. So, the smaller this number, the bone depth is, the further back an element would be. So if I were to make my head 0 and all the other leg elements a bigger number than that, that would mean that I would have a head in the back and legs moving in front of it. This would be undesirable in this case. Let's make our head 5. That puts our head in front. Let's also make our eyes and our mouth parts. Let's make that 6. Because that obviously needs to be in front of the face. Now, as far as the legs go, I'm going to take the top leg as a back leg and the bottom leg as a front leg. That would mean that we would have these two legs on depth 0, these two on depth 1, these two on depth 2, and these two on depth 3. We'll do that. Now that our bone depth is correctly set for all the legs and all the bones, let's create some geometry for our spider. Let's do auto geometry and generate for all visible. I ticked add weights, which also means that it automatically adds bone weights to the sprite. Now what the bone weight does is basically it determines how much each bone affects which areas of the sprite. As you can see, this bone here, which is blue, affects this area, which is the upper limb completely, but it also affects part of the head, which we don't want because that's going to deform our head. If you look at this, it's clearly visible. So what we want to do is firstly limit the influence of each bone to the actual sprite that it's supposed to have an influence on. Let's start with the head. Go bone influence. Now the only bone we really want to affect the head would be the head bone. There we go, so we can remove all the other bones. Okay, in the process, we've removed all the weights from the head. Now we can go weight brush. You select the bone that you want to paint for, and you can paint the bone influence straight onto the specific part that you want to be influenced. Okay, this is now all red, so if we move our head bone, there we go. Let's reset the pose and do the legs. Now that we've done the head, let's look at our other parts. Here's our sprite for leg 1. As we can see, it's only affected by the 2 bones that are inside it. You can tweak this with your bone brush if you want to clean this up. For now, we'll be okay. Let's check our other sprites. That one's fine. Fine. I'm going to pause here while I check everything and get back to you as soon as I'm done. That should be okay now. We can go preview pose. Check out all our different bones. If you can't see clearly, you can bring down the bone visibility. Happy, let's dry our eyes, mouth, there's a small piece of bone influence right there. Let's find mouth right. Just remove that. Now that we know everything is okay, we'll reset the pose and apply. Your sprite should now be ready for rigging. So let's close this. Drag it onto our scene. Now, if you look at the structure here, you'll see that you have the head bone there. And all the other bones are childed to this. Each sprite will move along with its bone. We can check our pose and we're good. Now, one practical thing that I want to do here quickly is to move the position of the legs. What I found with my sprite is that my leg positions mean that this leg has to stretch all the way down there to touch the ground, which is later on going to affect the size of our strides. So let's get all our legs to the same place. Just going to reset that. Move this over here. Same applies for there. You can, of course, choose to say move the legs to the outside to get some separation. That is completely up to you. For now, we'll leave this rigged as is. Our spider is now rigged for animation, and we are ready to move on in the next video to setting up the IK for the limbs, after which we will write our scripts to get the spider moving and to get the legs to work in a way that we expect it to work. For now, I'm Mani, and I'm saying goodbye.